Cool. So feel free from now until 10 to ask any questions you want on the exam. I have it out in front of me, so you can ask away about format, about anything. Feel free to unmute yourself. You can just type it in the chat. It's just going to be a little bit, I'm going to have to repeat myself in order to make sure that people that are watching the recording can know the question. So feel free to start whenever.
That's good. Good morning.
Morning. From breakfast at the same time.
Yeah, so I guess like starting off, what exactly is the function of the transport GLUT4?
Yeah. So GLUT4 is going to allow glucose to come into the cell for pretty much most of the cells in the body. So it's responsive to insulin, which is one of the main hormones that we kind of talked about. So when insulin binds to its receptor on a cell, like let's say muscle, it takes GLUT4 and then merges it with the membrane and then allows glucose to come in. So it's kind of like the door that allows the glucose to come in. Um, and insulin is the key. But for the intestinal cell, GLUT4 isn't what allows glucose to come in. It's the SGLT1 transporter, and that's an active transporter. And that works for both glucose and for galactose. And then for fructose, it's GLUT5. And then once those two are in the cell, or all three of those are in the cell, so glucose, galactose, and fructose, they all go into the portal vein through GLUT2. So there's a door to go in, that's SGLT1 for glucose and galactose, and GLUT5 for fructose, and then GLUT2 to allow both of them to exit the cell, the intestinal cell, and go into the portal vein to the liver. Hopefully that was maybe more detail than you wanted, but
No, no, detail is always appreciated.
I'm glad.
Cool.
Bridget asks, fill in the blanks. So for fill in the blanks, I'm gonna have you know about the fatty acids. So you should know about the essential fatty acids. You should know about the differences between omega-6s and omega-3s, and then you should know the main starting and I guess quote unquote effective fatty acids, right? So linoleic acid is our primary starting omega-6 fatty acid, but it doesn't have any of its pro-inflammatory effects until it gets converted into arachidonic acid. Likewise with omega-3s, our primary starting one is ALA, alpha linolenic acid, but nothing really happens with that until it gets converted into both EPA and DHA. EPA being the one that's responsible for anti-inflammatory responses, and then DHA much more so aligned with the pro-brain and eye health functions, especially with like developing fetuses and infants. So you should know basically those functions. Those are the essential ones, right? So we need to consume them. And then let's see, I have another fill in the blank related to the complete versus incomplete versus complementary proteins. So incomplete proteins tend to be plant proteins. There's a few exceptions, but what that's talking about is the profiles of amino acids, especially the essential amino acids. So a complete protein, which are typically animal proteins, are going to have all of the essential amino acids. But when people are trying to get those essential amino acids from a plant source, you end up needing to combine multiple plant sources in order to achieve a full profile. And that's what we call complementary proteins, which are taking two or more incomplete protein sources and combining them in order to kind of supplement each other's profiles and get all of the complete uh, essential amino acids. And those are the two fill in the blank questions. Mm-hmm.
I had a question on where does carb digestion occur and in what magnitudes, and like what enzymes allow chemical digestion to occur.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So for carbohydrate, things are going to be starting in the mouth when it comes to chemical digestion, and the enzyme is salivary amylase. And then nothing happens in the stomach because the acid in the stomach is going to denature and inactivate that enzyme. And then the majority of digestion is going to be happening in the small intestine. So after the small intestine, well, I should say that you should probably know everything that I talked about with Kayla's question about transporters in and transporters out. But after that, it goes into the portal vein, which goes directly to the liver for further processing. And I guess while we're at it, we might as well kind of compare and contrast. So with let's go protein next. No, we'll do fat next. So with fat, when in a healthy adult, there's some debate on it, but for the sake of your exam, fat digestion is for a healthy adult does not start in the mouth. For babies, it does just because they need the extra processes for digestion since their gastrointestinal system isn't fully developed and they have lingual lipase to be able to help with fat digestion in the mouth. But in a healthy adult, it's not going to play a relevant role. In the stomach, though, is the next place, or I should say the first place in a healthy adult where fat digestion occurs, and that's gastric lipase. After that, into the stomach, it's important to note that the fat needs something to help it mix with the fluids inside of the small intestine. So you have phospholipids that are coming from bile, the bile acids, those are going to encase. They're going to take the big glob of fat that you consumed and turn it into smaller little ones to allow it to emulsify. That structure is called a micelle, MICELLE. That allows it, are those fatty acids to travel towards the small intestinal cells where they get absorbed. Then they all get repackaged into a chylomicron, which is still encased in phospholipids. And then instead of the portal vein like it was with carbohydrate and protein, which we'll get into a second, chylomicrons actually go out into the lymph and then into the systemic circulation. And then for protein digestion, nothing happens in the mouth. It starts in the stomach. And the main things that are going to be working on protein in the stomach are pepsin and hydrochloric acid. So the acid that your stomach produces, hydrochloric acid, and the function of that is it's actually going to uncoil or unwind those proteins, which is denaturing them. And that allows them to be acted on more easily by the enzyme in your stomach, pepsin. It's important to note that pepsin, and this is one of your short answer questions, is why does pepsin need a preform or what we call it's actually called a zymogen. I haven't mentioned that in class, but it's basically an inactive form of the protein. So the stomach releases pepsinogen instead of pepsin, which is basically an inactive form of the pepsin enzyme. And the reason that we do that is because otherwise the pepsin would digest the cells that are making it or the cells of the stomach. But instead, releasing that pepsinogen into the stomach, it will interact with the hydrochloric acid there, which is also kind of where all that food is that you just consumed, converting pepsinogen into pepsin, which then can work on the proteins that were just uncoiled by the hydrochloric acid. After that, it's the free amino acids or the larger peptides are going to go, peptides being proteins, are going to go from the stomach into the small intestine where the majority of digestion is going to occur. And then similar to carbohydrate, they're going to go into the portal vein and then to the liver. I think I covered everything. Did that answer more than you wanted, Amelia?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And now you have it all recorded so you can listen to it a million times if you want to.
So just to confirm, yeah, with fat digestion, so it mostly occurs in the small intestine with the And do you want to specify with the enzyme in
I'm
the
not
small
gonna
intestine or
ask
just in the
you.
stomach?
Yeah, just in the stomach, because there's a lot of
Cool.
different enzymes that are going to be working on protein, carbs, and fats in the small intestine, and I feel like it's more worth it for you just to understand that the majority of digestion is happening in the small intestine for all of them. But for, like where digestion is starting, I would just kind of be aware of those enzyme specific names. But a lot of the enzymes in the intestines are pretty like they're pretty intuitive. So a lot of like pancreatic lipases, or you have all the different like sucrase and lactase and things like that. Like I think
Mhm.
they're like they might not be intuitive at first, but I feel like it's like if you saw it on an exam, it would make a lot of sense. So I don't think that it's overly relevant to know anything besides the fact that the majority of digestion is happening in the small intestine.
Oh, solid. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Celicia asks, can I talk about gut transit times of soluble and insoluble fiber? Yeah, absolutely. Um, So with soluble fiber, it is soluble to water, so it's actually going to absorb water and it's going to form these like big old gels. I kind of imagine a sponge that's taking up water. And so because of that, what it's actually going to do is it's going to increase transit time. And when you say increasing transit time, what that means is that it takes longer to get from one end of the small intestine out to the toilet, basically. Um, it can be kind of confusing thinking about increasing and decreasing transit times. So I kind of just think about it like how long is whatever traveling, right? Like the feces or the nutrients traveling in the gastrointestinal system. With insoluble fiber, it doesn't form those gels. And so what it actually does is it's because it doesn't take up water, it kind of just like drags along the large intestine undigested. And what that does is it draws like small amounts of inflammation and water in, which basically increases the speed at which it's going through. In other words, that's called decreasing the transit time. So hopefully that helps out. Also, you should know about soluble fiber and its abilities to kind of like blunt the absorption of things like glucose or cholesterol, because it can physically bind to those things and prevent them from being absorbed. That answer your question, Celicia?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Of course.
And just confirming again with carb digestion in the small intestine, the enzyme is pancreatic amylase.
Oh, the carbohydrate. Yeah, in the small intestine, pancreatic amylases. There's a bunch of different ones, but there's, like sucrase and lactase and maltase and other, very specific ones, but you're not going to need to know those for your exam.
Oh, solid. So maybe just know that salivary amylase is like what starts it off.
And then there's nothing in the stomach because that salivary amylase gets denatured by the stomach acids.
Solid. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Amelia asked what makes amino acids unique versus carbs and fats. So all three have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in them, but amino acids have nitrogen. So that's the unique component about them. And you should also be able to label that. If I showed you a picture of like an amino acid and its structure, you should be able to identify that where the nitrogen is the amine group or amine group, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And then you have your R group, which is the individual like side group or chain structure of an amino acid that gives it its specific functions. And then the carboxylic acid, which you kind of just have to memorize it, but it's carbons and a double bonded oxygen, so, or yeah, hydroxyl group, but yep. So, Emily asked, can I mention the naturally occurring versus artificial non-nutritive sweeteners? Absolutely. I would just note that all of the artificial ones are the ones that in the beginning of that Netflix explained episode: sucralose, aspartame, saccharin, acesulfame, potassium. Those are the 4 artificial ones. So that means that all the other ones are naturally occurring in some way. And I would also be aware of like what the risks are and for like what group. So I talked about things like cancer and increasing food intake, like increasing hunger, and a lot of those things are concerns in like animals or kind of demonstrated in cells. But when you actually put them into a human type of trial and investigating it in free living individuals, you don't see the same thing. So a lot of the concerns are basically just in animals and cells, and they don't really kind of follow through, or they don't really manifest when it comes to humans. Bridget asked, what structure should we know besides the last one mentioned? Fatty acids as well. You should probably be aware of like how to name fatty acids. So I might ask you, which one of these is a saturated fat? Which one of these is a monounsaturated fat? Like which one of these is a like a trans fat? Which of these is an omega-3 versus omega-6, right? So saturated fats on the carbon chain are completely filled with hydrogens, and the monounsaturated fat has 1 double bond. Polyunsaturated fats have more than 1 double bond, and where that double bond starts relative to the end of the chain, specifically the methyl end, which is the one that has just the carbon and hydrogens, is going to dictate whether it's an omega-3 or an omega-6. And then a trans fat is relative to that double bond, the orientation of the hydrogens on either side. So if they're both on the same side, then it's a cis trans fatty acid. If they're on opposite sides, then it would be a trans fatty acid. Got Disney music playing in the background.
What do we need to know just regarding like the free fatty acid, cholesterol, and like phospholipids, just kind of like their importance or like their function?
Yeah, I think those are pretty much the same thing, like the importance and the function. So you should know that we eat triglycerides. It's also the type that we produce in the body, the types of fats that we produce in the body for energy. Free fatty acids make up triglycerides, right? Three free fatty acids make up triglycerides, and those are basically like the main energy related ones. The other ones, like you should know that cholesterol plays a role in, hormones. It plays a role in cell structure, right? And then phospholipids play a few different roles in the cell membrane as well as in the like in the bile acids to help emulsify fats to help us digest them. So I mean, you can also look at, and I might ask about like the general functions of fat, which are going to be things like insulation, protection, right? Energy is obviously a main one. And I don't think, I mean, it's in other things like your brain and your axons. It's the stuff that makes up that myelin that allows nerve transmission to happen faster. But I wouldn't ask something super specific like that, but I would just generally know the functions of fat as well as those individual components of fat. Hopefully that was specific enough.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. What did you know from the Saturated Fat podcast? That's a good question. Is there anything that I asked you about it? Oh, The one thing that I don't think I ask anything that's directly tied into it, but I do think that you should understand like the role that each type of fatty acid plays, right? So out of all of them, where's the risk kind of related? So saturated fat plays a role when it comes to cardiovascular disease risk, but that role is not super clear, and it's definitely not. Unsaturated fat is not an unhealthy thing. It's only unhealthy in large quantities. Trans fat tends to be the one that has a large negative effect, and we try to minimize as much as possible. Monounsaturated fats tend to be pretty neutral in terms of consumption. They don't really have a whole lot of effect in either direction. And then omega 6s and omega 3s are something that we need a very particular balance of. So over consuming them is not a good idea. Just being able to be not efficient, being having enough, right? In terms of the balance as well as the overall amount. Sufficient was the word I was looking for. Sufficient your intake. I was like, what is the word?
Still the morning.
I know. And I'm all like sneezy, and I took like some Robitussin yet last night, so it's all kind of a blur.
Ooh, fun.
I know.
So for most of the non-nutritious sweeteners, they were discovered like with is that question pertaining to how like they literally like tasted it to test
Yeah.
it? Okay.
Yep. I mean, some of like the natural, so non-nutritive refers to everything that's not a like high calorie containing sweetener. So being able to differentiate non-nutritive into artificial sweeteners, and then like the quote unquote natural low calorie sweeteners like the sugar alcohols and monk fruit extract and stevia is pretty important. But all the artificial ones are pretty much discovered from accidentally tasting them in some way.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then what are the relative protein needs relationship with adults?
Oh,
Or sorry, actually it says like relationship with age.
yeah. I mean, that makes your question makes sense. So,
Cool.
um, when you're a baby, you don't need a whole lot of food, but your relative protein needs are high because even though you don't weigh a lot, you still need a decent amount of protein in order to help support growth. So your
Oh.
absolute protein requirements are low because you just can't put all that much food into a baby. But the need is high in order to support growth. Whereas with an adult, the the absolute like the numerical value for protein is higher because an adult is eating more, but their relative needs for protein are not as high because they don't need to support that same level of growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Um, Amelia asked, do we need to be able to name one conditionally essential amino acid and when they are needed? Yes, just one. So make sure that you list a conditionally essential one and not an essential one or a non-essential one. Um, so a conditionally essential one, you basically have your entire pick of the ones that are in the slides. So just pick one that resonates with you the most, whether it be arginine for nitrous oxide creation or proline and glycine for connective tissue synthesis. Just pick one to be able to name it, be able to tell me what physiological role it plays generally, and then tell me how that physiological role plays into why it is becoming conditionally essential under those certain circumstances. That makes sense. Yeah. And then Bridget asked, will there be any questions about the protein intake one? I don't think so.
Nope, there's nothing on that. The one question that I think is important though is understanding that 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein per weight, 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight protein intake. There you go. Is not the optimal. So the RDA is to help prevent deficiency, but it is not something that is going to support, you know, all of the various activity and lifestyle contexts that are going to require a little bit more protein. Nor is it, protein has a lot of other benefits in terms of like satiety as well, making sure people feel full. So I think that understanding that is going to help you out. But that's only like a couple of true false questions that are about like protein deficiency or protein adequacy.
So in the study guide, when it talks about like sequence of carb metabolism, it's just talking about how it goes like from the mouth to the stomach and small intestine, kind of like what it's doing there. That's just what it's asking.
It's a good question. So it's actually talking about how we use carbohydrate, not about the digestion process.
Ew, okay.
First, if we need energy, we use it for energy. And then if we don't need that energy very readily, we're going to store it, but it can get stored in a couple different ways. First, we're going to replenish our glycogen stores, and you should know that there's glycogen in our muscle and glycogen in our liver. If we don't need energy and glycogen stores are filled, the excess goes into creating adipose tissue or fat. So it gets converted into fat. And so those are the three kind of fates for it. Alternatively, you know, if you're like a type 2 diabetic and it's actually not advantageous for you, you have so much glucose in your blood that you don't have the ability to, or sometimes even the metabolic efficiency to turn it into fat. What it ends up doing is it goes into the urine and you end up peeing it out and risking all of the kidney damage that comes from trying to filter those molecules. So yeah, those are like the fates or the what happens to carbohydrate, the sequence, right? So energy, glycogen storage, fat storage, pee it out.
Okay, perfect. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Emily asked, what should we say about proline and glycine other than its involvement in connective tissue? No, I mean, that's pretty much it. Just understand like that's kind of the main role for it. And then the context by which you would need more connective tissue would be if you have a lot of like high impact types of activities like jump rope, or you're like a hardcore parkour kind of person, or even if you have like a burn or an injury, a lot of times, like even a cut, you're going to require collagen to be made, connective tissue to be made in order to help support like wound healing and making sure that you don't bleed out everywhere. So hopefully that helps. And then Bridget asks how many true false on the exam and how many short answer. True false. Let's see. You got 10 true false. You got 2 fill in the blanks. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got 5 short answers. And we've talked about, let's see, we talked about a few of them already. We talked about the conditionally essential amino acid one. We talked about the pepsin to pepsinogen one. There is going to be one about whether or not fruit sugars are bad for you, and you're going to say no, because there's a lot of good things that are in fruit, like nutrients, but also specifically the sugar isn't going to have massive effects on your blood sugar because of water and fiber, which are going to help space out the digestion, like diluting it. And then after that, I'm going to ask you what the naturalistic fallacy is. And the naturalist, you're going to say that the naturalistic fallacy is this false idea that just because things are natural means that they're better for you. And you can name examples, or you should name examples that are, you can go outside of nutrition if you want. You can say earthquakes and tornadoes kill people, they're bad. Buildings and eyeglasses are great because they help, you know, people see and stay protected. Or you can use nutritional examples like how some of the artificial sweeteners like aspartame actually have a lot more evidence behind them than some of the natural ones like stevia. Or you can talk about how GMOs have created situations where people can keep crops growing year round and help provide more food and nutrition for people over longer periods of time. So all these different examples that you can use, just whatever resonates with you the most. Oh, and then the other, I guess the last short answer question is the one about omega-3 fatty acids and whether or if why fish are a better source of omega-3 fatty acids than plant sources like flax and chia. And the reason for that is that most plant sources contain ALA, which is our kind of our starting omega-3 fatty acid. But as you remember, ALA doesn't do anything on its own. It needs to be converted into EPA and DHA. We are extremely inefficient as a species at converting ALA into EPA and DHA. So being able to be like the fish has already digested like phytoplankton and things like that, which are plants and have ALA, and converts them already into EPA and DHA. So basically, by consuming the fish, even though the total amount of omega-3 is actually a lower amount, it's the type of omega-3 that we needed in the first place, which are the EPA for the anti-inflammatory and the DHA for the brain and eye health functions. So that was all of the short answer questions. Yeah. More questions? Anyone else? All good. Have a good one. Bridget and Celicia. Okay. Can I discuss the differences between kwashiorkor and marasmus? Yes. So kwashiorkor is a pure protein deficiency. So both of these have people that are deficient in protein, but the differences are that kwashiorkor is a pure protein deficiency, so they're good in all the other nutrients. And marasmus is a total deficiency. So usually they're going to be not only deficient in protein, but they're going to be deficient in total energy. They're going to be deficient in fat and carbohydrate and all the other nutrients. And you can kind of see the differences because in marasmus, they look very classically starved, so very thin, very weak. But in kwashiorkor, there's a lot of protein-related functions that aren't being met properly. So you see, like cracked, scaled, spotted skin from proteins not being able to replenish themselves properly. And you see things like edema in the stomach and the ankles because of the role that protein plays in balancing fluids, keeping fluids in the bloodstream rather than the pressure from your blood actually pushing that fluid out into the extracellular spaces like the tissues. So you can kind of look at the physical differences, but it's mostly just that kwashiorkor is a pure protein deficiency and the marasmus is an overall energy deficiency, which also includes protein. But I am super sniffly. Of course. So y'all got another 15 minutes, so feel free to keep asking. Make sure that you bring a Scantron, whatever it is, the 880E or whatever it says on your syllabus. You won't need a calculator this time. And also make sure you bring a pencil that works, so #2 pencil, or one of those mechanical pencils that will work for your Scantron. Thank you. Have a good one. Any other questions, Bridget? Okay, cool. Of course. All right. Thanks for coming. I'll have this uploaded by probably as soon as possible. I'm just going to convert it over. Ah, the code. I'll message that to you directly. Of course. All right. Have a good rest of your day. And thanks everyone for watching the video if you're watching on YouTube.